So you've got yourself a 1.4 TSi TFSi engine from the Volkswagen Audi group, and you're just looking for a little bit more power. Well, that's the engine that I've got in my A3, so it's certainly something that I've been playing with and I'm going to be playing with over the following months and years. So subscribe to this channel and just keep up with my progress, and I'll report back all of my findings. But in this video, we're going to look at the best mods and the best upgrades for your 1.4 TSi TFSi. We're also going to mention the early twin-charged version, some of the differences over the years, and some of the best upgrades that you can do. And not all of the upgrades that people do are worth doing. The popular upgrades often don't give you very much of a performance gain. So we're going to dissect some of the myths around tuning your 1.4 TFSi engine, just to make sure you don't waste your money and that you get the maximum return for your investment in your tuning project. And the aim here really is just to create a car that is fun to drive. You've chosen the 1.4 TFSi because it's a sensible choice. It gives you power, it gives you performance, and it gives you decent economy as well, and it's quite a good cheap engine to live with and run. So you're just looking to add a little bit of extra something to what you've already got. With a few subtle mods, you can certainly increase the performance of these engines. There's a few mods that you really want to look out for and avoid. A lot of people do these mods, but they don't actually do very much to actually increase the power or your enjoyment of the car. So the 1.4 TSi and TFSi also came with various power levels. There was a 120 horsepower version, so they've covered as many bases as they can. They've thought about what these engines are going to be put in, and in some cases they're being put in quite small family cars that are just really wanting the maximum amount of economy, but they're also going into sporty variants where people demand a little bit more performance. So we see quite a bit of variation from the factory, and it's worth noting that some of the smaller engines generally require more work to take them up to the higher power levels, particularly around the fueling, the injectors, the fuel pump, that sort of area. You need to make sure they're capable of flowing enough fuel for the power gains that you're aiming at. And because the Volkswagen Audi Group engine designations are somewhat confusing, I'm going to pass on a tip that I was given just to help me avoid that confusion. It pretty much guarantees that you'll always buy the correct part for your car. So there's a lot of confusion about engines when it comes to the Volkswagen Group, just in the way they label it. Most engines have an EA designation, and EA211 is your typical 1.4 TFSi. But there is a lot of confusion as to which engine has which designation. So rather than do specific videos on the correct engine designations and just adding to the confusion, we're going to discuss the 1.4 TFSi TSi, and there's been quite a few revisions of it over the years. In fact, the first one actually had a twin charge setup, so it had a supercharger and a turbocharger. Now the advantage of that was you get quite a lot of boost from the supercharger at low RPMs. The supercharger is running at 5 times the crank speed and is effective up to about 2,400 RPM. At 2,400 RPM, everything goes over to the turbo and the supercharger is left to rest, and the turbo does all the work, but the engine is now spinning up enough to allow you to explore the power band that you're getting from the turbocharger. The twin charger engines were rather complex, and I'm not really surprised that Volkswagen eventually dropped them. So if you've got the twin charged engine, one of the simplest mods that you can do on the supercharger is just to change the pulley size. You can effectively overdrive the compressor on the supercharger, forcing it to compress more air. So if you combine that with a map, you've got a pretty decent power gain on option. So remaps on those have made significant gains because you've got two forced induction units, and getting them to work together or just changing the switchover points or increasing the capacity of the turbocharger can make significant power gains. And we've seen people hitting 170 to 200, 240 horsepower on those engines just by some clever remapping and other modest upgrades. The newer versions of the engine have only got a single turbocharger, and it's a very clever setup. It's a nice turbocharger. It spools up quickly. It doesn't feel like your conventional turbo where there's a lot of lag and then it suddenly kicks in. The engine does feel a little lifeless to about 1200, 1300 RPM, but you kind of get used to that. Most of the power is where you need it in your everyday drive. So please boot that like button. It really helps us to get out there. We're a small channel. We appreciate all the help we get. Let us know in the comments what car you've got. So we've got other videos coming up on the 1.4 TFSi and TSi. So common restrictions that you would get in the 1.4 TFSi engine has to be the catalyst on the exhaust. So don't think about doing a decat, because that's illegal in most areas. You don't want to make your car illegal. So if you get pulled over, you run the risk of a fine, a citation, or having your car confiscated, depending on where you are in the world. Because there's a really good alternative. A sports catalyst flows every bit as well as removing the catalyst altogether. There is very little in it. When you get these cars side by side on the dyno, having a decat and a sports cat, if it's a well-designed sports catalyst, it will free up the flow through the exhaust and help you to make those higher power figures. But certainly just getting the car remapped makes significant power gains. And if the only mod you're thinking of doing is a small investment for a remap, which you can get for about 300 to 500, depending on where you are in the world and what currency you're using, the remap will give you a significant boost in your power. So without any other mods, a 150 can easily go to about 170, 185. And with other supporting mods, you can push that up towards the 200 brake horsepower limits. To get the higher power figures though, you need to think about upgrading the injectors, the fuel pump and the turbocharger. And there's certainly a decent array of aftermarket turbochargers. The choice was quite limited a few years ago because these are relatively new engines that have just come out. So the TDO25 turbo was used in the 1.4 TFSi engines, and it's a good reliable turbo for the design that came out of the factory. But if you were trying to push about 200 horsepower, you really do need to think about upgrading that turbo. Some people have used the KO3 and the KO3S turbos to reach and exceed the 200 brake horsepower barrier on these 1.4 litre engines. But thankfully the aftermarket is catching up and there's some good bolt-on options available, and that number is increasing all the time. Again, bear in mind that your 1.4 isn't flowing an awful lot of air, so you won't get away with fitting a large turbo. So some of the turbos that would work really well on a 2 litre TFSi will just have a lot of lag on the 1.4 engine and won't be anywhere near as effective. So check out the articles on our site. We keep those very updated. So as I get more information, more feedback, or I find mods and upgrades, I update those articles. Whereas with this video, once it's done, I can't just add little snippets to it. So check out the article in the link below on our site and just make sure you've got the latest information when it comes to turbo upgrades for your 1.4 TFSi. So induction kits and intakes, a lot of people feel there's a restriction in the intake, but actually the intakes on most of the 1.4 engines are pretty good. They certainly can flow up to the manufacturer's specifications and then some. So there's quite a bit of headway already built in. So if you put a car on a dyno and you had the induction kit fitted, you would typically see round about 2 to 3 brake horsepower more power, which is insignificant. That's generally at the top end. Often you end up with a little bit of a dip down the low end, so you're losing a little bit of power at the bottom end. So in terms of cost and performance, induction kits really don't offer very much. The only time to get an induction kit is if you've done significant tuning, your car requirement for air is exceeding the standard factory airbox and intake, or if you just want the nice induction raw sound that you get. Intercooler upgrades certainly make a lot of sense. So some 1.4 TFSIs seem to not have an intercooler at all. If you're looking for it, you'll be somewhat confused by the layout within the engine. And the intercooler is actually fitted into the intake manifold. It is a metal plate on the front of the engine. And this is a liquid cooled intercooler. So it's a fascinating design. But in most cases of performance tuning, if you're experiencing heat soak and the problem is related to the intercooler not having sufficient cooling capacity, then fitting a front mounted intercooler is really the best upgrade that you can do. Some models did seem to actually come with proper intercoolers that were air cooled, and again these can be readily upgraded. You just need to be very careful when specifying parts to get something that is designed to fit your engine. Otherwise you're going to have quite a challenging task getting this plumbed in and set up to work properly on your engine. And just having an intercooler can make a significant difference to the intake temperatures, particularly during summer months where you're starting off with much warmer air. So a drop of about 40 degrees in the intake will have a significant impact on the power that you get from your turbocharger on your engine. So fitting a lighter flywheel will allow the engine to rev more freely. But bear in mind, if you've got the cylinder on demand option, it's going to struggle a little bit. Just running on 2 cylinders creates a lot of additional vibration, and the manufacturers have chosen a kick-in point of about 1400 RPMs. So I would argue that a lighter flywheel is not really an option for those engines. You will really affect its low down idling and smooth running at those lower RPM figures when the cylinder on demand cuts in, and create a lot of problems for yourself. And again, if you've not got the cylinder on demand option, don't go too light with the flywheel. The flywheel is there for a reason, and it helps to keep the momentum in the engine. But if you want faster throttle responses, that's certainly a decent upgrade that you can do. The camshaft profile affects the timing of the valves on the exhaust and the intake, and just changing the cam profile can make a significant difference to those. So if you take that into account when you get the car mapped, you can really adjust the power curve and get that power exactly where you want it. But once again, don't go too aggressive with your cam profile, because it's going to affect your idling and your low RPM driving in the car, and it's going to make it very difficult to live with in everyday traffic. Coil packs on these are thankfully quite reliable. There's been a lot of issues in the past with coil packs on the Volkswagen Audi group, but I've not heard very much when it comes to problems with the coil packs. You certainly won't be increasing power by uprating the coil pack. A spark is a spark. The plugs are well designed and generally last for about 40,000 miles, so there's not really a power gain to be had with that. When it comes to intakes as well, I would just recommend a cotton gauze panel air filter. That worked well on mine. It makes the engine breathe more easily. It takes out any restriction from the paper filter. The trade-off is it doesn't filter as well as the paper filter, so you do allow bigger particles to go into the engine. But I don't see that as a problem, because the cotton filters will still give you a decent level of filtration, certainly compared to the foam counterparts that you can get. And if you've done a remap or other mods to your car, it can certainly free up a restriction in the intake without going to the expense of replacing the whole induction kit. You've got to watch the carbon build-up, because these were direct injection engines. So although it is a frustration, every direct injection engine that doesn't employ some sort of port injection method will have a problem with carbon build-up. And I note that a lot of the newer Audi engines also use a little bit of port injection on the warm-up cycle, which really does eliminate any carbon build-up issue. So perhaps that's an option if you were an adventurous mechanic and you wanted to upgrade your car and avoid the carbon build-up issue. Setting up some kind of port injection could certainly help to remove that risk entirely. So the best mods that I would recommend, it has to be a remap. That's one of the most significant mods that you can get. If you've got the twin charged version, changing the pulleys on the supercharger can make a big difference. Then for significant power gains, you're really looking at upgrading the turbo and paying attention to the fuel system. At that point, the cost per horsepower is really starting to creep up to make sure that you get the right parts. There's nothing more disappointing than ordering parts for your tuning project, for them to arrive and you find they're okay-ish, but they don't quite fit your vehicle. So you've either got to customize them, which is costly and voids most of the warranties that you get, or you send it back and reorder the correct parts. So don't worry too much about the TSi and TFSi. The T stands for turbo and the FSi and SI stand for fuel stratified injection or stratified injection, and that just refers to the direct injection method. The labelling between cars in the Volkswagen Audi group leaves a lot to be desired. They seem to randomly use terms on their engines describing exactly the same engine. So when you're looking for upgrades, find the engine code on the engine block of your engine, because that will ensure that you get the correct upgrades. There were quite a few revisions to the engine over the years and significant changes were made. Different turbochargers were used, different setups as well. And the newer engines generally release a little bit of extra power, better fuel economy, and address some of the problems of the early engines. And I note that the 1.5 TFSi is essentially the same block. It's just got a different stroke, different pistons, and that's how they've got the extra capacity. And having driven one of those, it did sound a bit meatier, and it was a little more economical than a 1.4. So it does look like Audi and Volkswagen Group are moving in the right direction when it comes to the evolution of these great little engines. So we've got lots more videos coming up on the 1.4 TFSi. It's the engine I've got in my car. I'm playing with all sorts of different options, looking into mods and upgrades, and I'll be reporting my findings. So please stay tuned. If you haven't done so already, subscribe. So please boot that like button. It really helps us to get out there. We're a small channel. We appreciate all the help we get. Let us know in the comments what car you've got. We'll be doing specific videos for cars, and the more information I've got from you guys watching these videos, the more I can tailor this channel to suit you and address the cars that you actually want me to talk about. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching.